Rafael was a simple young man, coming from a small town, with big dreams and a heart full of determination. At that time, he was at the beginning of adulthood, trying to build his future with his own hands. He had just landed his first formal job as a bricklayer on a grand construction site, a rare chance for someone who had never worked with an official contract before. He wore worn but clean clothes, carried an old toolbox, a simple lunchbox made by his mother, and a determination that shone in his eyes. He woke up early before sunrise to arrive at the site ahead of time, eager to learn everything possible. He had no experience, but made up for it with effort and attention. Life had not been easy for him until then, and every step he took was a small victory. The construction site was a world apart, noisy, full of dust and rough voices. There, Rafael had to prove his worth every day, even though no one really looked at him. Among experienced workers, he faced the challenge of earning respect only through his work. Amid huge machines, piles of concrete and steel, the young man tried to absorb every detail, attentive to every instruction from the foreman. But the greatest challenge was far from the tools. It was the cold stare of the chief engineer, Dr. Augusto, a tall man with an arrogant manner who seemed to disdain anyone without a diploma or a position. Rafael felt the weight of that look, as if he were invisible or worse, a nuisance to the man who commanded. Everything there. In the first days, Rafael worked quietly, learning the routine and trying to adapt to the heavy pace of the site. Every step he took was an effort to show he was not just another laborer. He carried sacks of cement, adjusted the wooden molds for concrete, and watched the foreman's directions carefully. Everything seemed simple, but the pressure not to make mistakes was enormous. That world, where hierarchy was rigid, left no room for doubts or opinions from beginners. Rafael kept to himself every observation, every detail he saw on the ground, always thinking that one day it might make a difference. Deep down, he knew he needed to learn quickly to avoid falling behind. But what Rafael didn't expect was that one day a question of his would become a reason for laughter and public humiliation. At a meeting with engineers and supervisors, he felt a knot in his throat as he raised his hand and spoke about a possible error in the water drainage project. His voice was firm but timid, and he tried to explain what he had noticed. Soon, the uncomfortable silence was broken by restrained laughter, disapproving looks, and the sarcastic comment from Dr. Augusto, who mocked the young man by saying, "Rookies don't give opinions on the site." Rafael felt the shame grow, his face burning, while the engineer humiliated his effort and practical knowledge in front of everyone. After that meeting, the atmosphere changed for Rafael. What had already been difficult became heavier. The co-workers, who had previously not even looked at him, now avoided contact as if he had committed a grave mistake just for raising a doubt. The foreman also became more distant, neither supporting him nor helping with the small daily details. Rafael, however, did not let it show outwardly. He preferred to remain silent, avoiding arguments or confrontations. But inside, something started to grow, a firm desire to prove he was not wrong, even if no one believed him. He began mentally, noting every strange sign, every crack that appeared in the concrete, the soil that seemed to give way in some spots, and the slope that to him did not seem safe. As the days passed, heavy rains began to fall, making the worksite even more challenging. Rafael felt that this only increased the risk and watched worriedly as puddles formed where they shouldn't. He saw cracks slowly growing, witnessed water accumulating in corners that, in his opinion, should have been drained. All this confirmed what he had sensed from the beginning, but no one seemed willing to listen. Even the more experienced technicians ignored his observations, perhaps because of his lack of formal experience or prejudice against a laborer talking about engineering. Rafael continued his work, always discreet but attentive, saving every sign for the right moment. The day of the management inspection arrived like a silent storm. Engineers, investors, and top executives took over the site, observing every detail, with calculating eyes and haste. For Rafael, it was a tense, almost surreal moment. He knew that any problem found that day could change everything, for better or worse. He stayed in the corner, watching Chief Engineer Dr. Augusto lead the presentation with that air of superiority that seemed unshakable. The young man felt the pressure rise in his chest, but he also felt that it was now or never. This was the chance to show that his attention and doubts had not been in vain. When the engineer finished speaking, with his confident smile and dominating gaze, Rafael took a deep breath and, for the first time, interrupted the meeting. With a firm but respectful voice, he pointed out the spots where the settling soil and inadequate drainage could cause a serious problem. Silence took over the room. People exchanged glances, some frowning, others seeming suspicious. Dr. Augusto raised an eyebrow, surprised and irritated at the same time, and tried to discredit the young man. But to everyone's surprise, experienced technicians began to confirm Rafael's analysis, recognizing the imminent risk he had identified. The confirmation of the error by the technical team caused an immediate shock. Dr. Augusto, who until then had maintained an arrogant and confident stance, lost his composure in front of everyone. His eyes, once full of pride, now reflected a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He tried to find words, but the silence of those present was stronger than any answer he could give. Rafael, for his part, remained calm, with the dignified posture of someone who knows they did the right thing. There was not a trace of arrogance in him, only the certainty that his attention and courage had prevented a disaster. The weight of recognition finally began to settle on the group, and many colleagues looked at him with new respect, as if they were finally seeing him. At that moment, the dynamics of the site changed. Those who had ignored him before now came to ask for details, wanting to better understand what he had noticed. Rafael felt that the invisible line between laborer and engineer began to fade, not because of titles or diplomas, but through the recognition of his attentive gaze and silent effort. The young man saw that despite the past humiliation, his stance had never wavered. He continued his work with the same humility, but now with the certainty that he could trust his own voice. And perhaps for the first time, he felt truly heard. Dr. Augusto tried in vain to maintain the lost authority. He gave shorter speeches, avoided eye contact, and seemed to carry an invisible burden that even affected his decisions. His wounded pride turned his arrogance into uncomfortable silence. The investors and management, who had blindly trusted the engineer before, now looked at Rafael with renewed interest. The humble young man, who had been disregarded and ridiculed, was now seen as a key figure for the safety and success of the project. Change was palpable, and even the most skeptical began to acknowledge that knowledge does not always come on paper, but from practical experience and an attentive eye. Despite the sudden attention, Rafael did not let vanity take over. He remained simple, discreetly fulfilling his daily tasks, always with an observant look. He knew he still had much to learn, and that the respect he had earned needed to be maintained with actions, not just words. His story began to spread around the site, inspiring other workers who often felt invisible. The young man showed that the courage to speak up, even when disbelieved, can make all the difference, and that sometimes silence and attention are a man's greatest strengths. In the following weeks, Rafael continued to observe every detail of the project with increased care. He was not just a worker, but a silent guardian of that place, attentive to any sign of danger. The rains kept falling, and the ground still showed signs of instability. He noted everything, talked to the technicians when he could, always with humility and a desire to learn. Some colleagues began to approach him to hear his opinions, and he realized that the trust he had earned was not just because of the inspection episode, but because of his consistent behavior. Rafael was becoming more than a laborer. He was becoming an example. But not everything was easy for him. Dr. Augusto did not give up so easily, and on some occasions still tried to diminish Rafael, speaking quietly to other engineers or making comments to the foreman. They were small attacks, meant to undermine the young man's confidence. Rafael heard them but did not respond. He knew he didn't need to prove anything to that man. His focus was greater: to ensure the safety of the project, honor his work, and maintain the integrity of what he had achieved. That silent and firm stance surprised many by the strength Rafael carried inside. Over time, the project underwent important adjustments to correct the identified errors. The changes were not easy. They demanded extra effort and even delays in the schedule, which caused complaints among some team members. However, for Rafael, that was just a natural consequence of someone being attentive and willing to do what was right. He watched every intervention, learned from the technicians, and sometimes even helped to mark areas that needed extra care. The feeling of contributing to something bigger, something that could prevent tragedies, gave him a strength he didn't even know he had. Meanwhile, the looks of colleagues who had previously rejected him began to change definitively. Now, many asked for his opinion before making decisions on small, daily details. That young man who carried a simple toolbox and a modest lunchbox had won something no one could take away: true respect. It wasn't because of titles or diplomas, but because of his firm stance, attention to detail, and courage to speak when necessary. Rafael felt that, for the first time, his work and his voice carried weight, and that changed everything for him. Rafael's transformation on the site did not go unnoticed outside of it. His family began to hear from people how the humble young man had faced a difficult situation and changed the course of that great project. For him, humility and respect for his origins remained intact, but silent pride was inevitable. He knew that the defining moment not only had saved the structure, but also renewed his self-esteem and confidence for the future. At home, every night he slept with the feeling of a mission accomplished, even knowing the path ahead was still long. Rafael never sought personal recognition or fame. What he wanted deep down was only to do his job with dignity and be valued for what he really was: an ordinary man, a worker, with attentive eyes and an open heart. And that was exactly what he earned. That difficult day when his courage was tested became a lesson for him and everyone who witnessed his story, a lesson that truth and human value can overcome prejudice and arrogance, transforming lives and work environments. In the days following the inspection, Rafael became a reference point on the site. The small conversations during breaks, which were once silent and indifferent, were now filled with questions and exchanges of experience. He never put himself above others, nor bragged about what he had done. On the contrary, he showed genuine humility, always willing to learn and help. The older workers, who had years of experience, began to look at him with admiration, understanding that experience and attention are worth more than status. It was impressive to see how the young man, who carried his mother's simple lunchbox, now inspired confidence and respect around him. Rafael knew that recognition was not just about him, but about the value of simple and honest work. That day, marked by courage, served to restore the dignity of all who, like him, gave their body and soul to build something greater. He felt he had given a voice to many who had none, and that his attitude showed that every person matters, regardless of function or education. This lesson was greater than any structure that could be built there. It was a message of respect and appreciation for the human being in his truest state: hard-working, dedicated, and above all, dignified. The impact of that day also brought a silent change inside Rafael himself. He realized that beyond physical work, there was a huge space to grow as a person. The courage to take a stand, even in the face of disdain, was a milestone he would carry forever. In that hard routine, with strong sun and dust, he found an inner strength he didn't know he had. Every challenge began to be faced with more confidence, and every small gesture, even the simplest, gained special meaning. Rafael was no longer just any young man on that site. He was living proof that determination and respect can transform realities. Even with all the recognition, Rafael remained true to his roots. At home, his simple ways and modest joy never changed. He still carried his mother's lunchbox, wore worn shoes, but now with a different sparkle in his eyes. The humility he always had was his greatest asset, and that humility, mixed with the courage of that moment, inspired not only co-workers but also his family and community. For him, what mattered was being true to himself, and that made all the difference in life and in the hearts of those around him. In the days that followed, Rafael was frequently consulted about details of the project, something he never would have imagined at the start. The doubts and observations that were once ignored were now valued, and he felt the responsibility grow. With every new conversation, he sought to learn, ask, and understand more, because he knew it was not enough to simply alert to problems. It was necessary to help build solutions. Even with the recognition, he did not let vanity take over. He kept his feet on the ground and his gaze always alert, aware that true value lies in dedication and respect, not in the title someone carries. Dr. Augusto, on the other hand, never managed to regain his image with the team. His wounded pride translated into distancing himself, and gradually he lost ground to other professionals who valued collective work and mutual respect. The young man who was once ridiculed now represented a new way of doing things, where listening to those on the front line was as important as calculations and blueprints. This quiet but powerful change began to transform the work environment, making it more humane and collaborative, a place where every voice had value. Rafael felt that even on the toughest days, something bigger was at stake. Every effort, every hard day of work carried the hope that he was not only building a project but also a new story for himself. That young man who arrived shy, with few tools, now walked with more firmness, not out of arrogance, but with the confidence of someone who knows his worth goes far beyond what is seen. He understood that respect is not imposed, it is earned, and sometimes silence and observation are the most powerful weapons for that. The public recognition he received did not change his essence. Rafael remained simple, focused, valuing every lesson and maintaining his commitment to a job well done. He knew the path would still be long, full of challenges and new obstacles, but he felt ready to face them. More than that, he carried the certainty that dignity does not depend on position or status, but on attitude toward life and others. That was the greatest lesson that day, and all that experience gave him, a lesson he would surely carry forever. In the following months, Rafael realized that the trust he had earned was more than a passing recognition. It was a change reflected in his daily life, in the relationships he built with each colleague, in the way he saw his own value. He understood that his voice, once silenced, now carried weight because it was authentic, based on experience and honesty, and that made him feel less alone in that harsh and prejudiced world. Rafael knew his journey was just beginning, but the certainty that he could make a difference was the fuel to keep going strong, even when the road seemed uncertain or tiring. At home, the change was also felt. The family, who had always believed in him, saw in the young man a new strength, a light that came from silent achievement and the courage to take a stand. Rafael returned tired, but with a light heart, knowing his effort was not in vain. The conversations at the table, his mother's hug, the simple joy of being able to help, All that gave meaning to his tough routine. And even in difficult moments, he carried the memory of that day, the day when, with respect and firmness, he showed that even the humblest can have a voice and be heard. Rafael's life was never the same after that episode. He continued at the site, not as someone who needed to prove his worth, but as a respected professional whose opinion was taken seriously. More importantly, he changed how he saw himself. A humble young man, yes, but capable of great deeds when he believed in himself. That difficult day, marked by fear, shame, and courage, taught him that true respect is earned with attitude, patience, and dignity, and that the attentive eye of someone who lives the reality can be more powerful than any title. And so in the silence of the construction site, among machines, dust, and sweat, Rafael left his mark, not only on the structure he helped build, but in the lives of those who saw his courage and humility. He proved that experience, character, and determination are the most valuable tools anyone can have, that even amidst disdain and arrogance, truth can prevail and transform everything around. And in the end, what really matters is to be heard, to be respected, and above all, to never lose hope that life can be better for everyone.